In Helsinki's tech district, a quiet data analyst was about to overhear words that would ignite corporate warfare. What started as a routine conference call took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her CEO's true opinion. Belle Mitchell wasn't your typical employee. For 3 years, she had built algorithms powering Nordtech's success, known for methodical precision others overlooked. When CEO Jessica dismissed her as expendable in Finnish, Belle's fluent understanding would lead to calculated revenge. What began as discrimination would become systematic exposure of corruption, proving the most dangerous employees are those you underestimate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Belle Mitchell adjusted her headset and settled deeper into her cramped Helsinki office chair, the familiar hum of Nordtech Solutions' open workspace buzzing around her. Snow dusted the windows of the third-floor office, the November afternoon already darkening into the Finnish winter that had become as much home to her as anywhere else. The quarterly review conference call had been scheduled for 2 hours, and they were already 90 minutes in, so we're looking at the Q4 allocations for the Nordic expansion project. Jessica Mitchell's voice crackled through the speakers, her tone carrying that particular blend of confidence and authority that had made her CEO at 38. Belle's fingers moved automatically across her keyboard, pulling up the relevant spreadsheets while half listening to the discussion between Jessica and the Helsinki-based clients. Belle had learned to multitask during these calls. Jessica rarely asked for her input directly, despite Belle being the senior data analyst whose algorithms had quietly powered most of Nordtech's breakthrough AI consulting work. Instead, Belle would sit in her corner office, if you could call the cramped space with its single window an office, and provide the technical backbone while Jessica handled the relationship management. The conversation had shifted to staffing concerns, budget constraints, the usual corporate dance of managing expectations. Belle's grandmother's voice echoed in her mind as it sometimes did during these long meetings. Kuuntele, kultaseni. Listening is more powerful than speaking. Momo had taught her Finnish alongside Mandarin and English, weaving languages together like the colorful scarves she knitted during the long Minnesota winters of Belle's childhood. Now, regarding the personnel adjustments we discussed, Jessica was saying, her voice taking on that particular executive cadence that meant difficult decisions were being presented as inevitable market forces. Belle looked up from her screen, sensing something in the tone shift. Jessica continued in English, but then, and this was where everything changed, she switched to Finnish. Her pronunciation was clumsy, the accent clearly American, but she was attempting to speak directly to the Finnish clients, in what she obviously thought was a gesture of cultural respect. Meja on mutamia työntekijöitä, jotka ovat tarpeettomia, Jessica said, stumbling slightly over the longer words, especially some of the data analysts. Belle Mitchell, for instance, she's expendable. Good technical work, but limited leadership potential. We can restructure around her position if needed. Belle's fingers froze over her keyboard. Tarpeeton. Expendable. The word hit her like a physical blow, not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it perfectly. Jessica had no idea that Belle spoke fluent Finnish, learned at her grandmother's kitchen table, along with stories of resilience and the quiet strength of enduring. Jessica had just dismissed 3 years of Belle's innovations, her late nights debugging algorithms, her solutions to problems that had stumped senior engineers. Belle's face remained composed, years of professional discipline keeping her expression neutral, even as her mind reeled. She continued typing, muscle memory maintaining the facade of productivity while her world shifted beneath her. The Finnish clients responded with understanding murmurs, discussing restructuring timelines and cost savings, as if Belle weren't sitting right there, as if she were already gone. The language barrier sometimes creates inefficiencies anyway, Jessica continued, back in English now, apparently satisfied with her linguistic diplomacy. We need team members who can communicate seamlessly with our international expansion goals. The irony was breathtaking. Belle, who spoke 3 languages fluently and had spent her MIT years working with international research teams, was being dismissed as linguistically limited by a woman who had just butchered Finnish grammar while insulting her to her face. Belle's mind began working with the analytical precision that had made her valuable to Nordtech in the first place. This wasn't just casual cruelty. This was strategic. Jessica was positioning Belle's eventual removal as a language and leadership issue rather than acknowledging that Belle's algorithms were integral to their AI consulting success. It was perfect corporate camouflage for what amounted to taking credit for Belle's work while eliminating the person who could challenge that narrative. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but Belle heard none of it. Her mind was mapping patterns, connections, possibilities. How many other times had Jessica spoken about her this way? How many decisions had been made about Belle's future without her knowledge? How many innovations had Jessica quietly claimed as executive vision, rather than crediting the technical work that made them possible? When the call finally ended, Belle sat in the sudden quiet of her office, the winter afternoon having faded completely into the early darkness of Nordic winter. The open workspace beyond her door hummed with normal activity, colleagues finishing projects, planning weekend activities, living their professional lives within the comfortable assumption that merit was recognized and contribution was valued. Belle opened a new document on her computer. She'd always been methodical, a trait that had served her well in data analysis. If Jessica thought Belle was expendable, if Jessica believed she could dismiss years of technical innovation as easily as mispronouncing a Finnish insult, then it was time for Belle to apply her analytical skills to a new kind of problem. She began with Jessica's background, MIT education, like Belle's own, but focused on business rather than computer science. A series of consulting positions that emphasized client relationships over technical development. The Nordtech CEO position, which Jessica had secured after a successful pitch about expanding into Nordic markets, a pitch that, Belle now realized, had heavily featured algorithms that Belle had developed, but Jessica had presented as collaborative executive planning. Belle pulled up project files, expense reports, personnel decisions from the past 2 years. Patterns emerged. They always did when you knew how to look. Jessica's expense accounts showed unusual patterns. Large, frequent charges that seemed inconsistent with necessary business travel. High-end purchases that pushed the boundaries of corporate policy. More interesting were the project attribution records, where Jessica's name appeared as primary contributor on technical innovations that Belle distinctly remembered developing in her cramped office, while Jessica managed client relationships. The snow continued falling outside Belle's window, each flake unique but part of a larger system that transformed the landscape through accumulated impact. Belle understood systems, both technical and human. Jessica had made a critical error in assuming that quiet competence meant ignorance or acceptance. Belle's Finnish grandmother had survived the Winter War through a combination of patience, precision, and the understanding that sometimes the most effective resistance looked like compliance, until the moment came to act. Mummo's stories had been full of people who were underestimated, dismissed, written off, and who used that dismissal as camouflage for more strategic thinking. Belle saved her preliminary research and closed her laptop. Tomorrow, she would begin in earnest. Tonight, she would plan. She gathered her things methodically, the same way she approached every task. But as she walked through the open workspace toward the elevator, past colleagues who nodded politely without really seeing her, Belle felt something she'd never experienced in her 3 years at Nordtech. Purpose. Jessica Mitchell thought she was expendable. It was time to demonstrate just how essential Belle had always been, and just how expensive dismissing her would prove to be. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Belle Mitchell began her transformation from overlooked analyst to strategic architect. The game had begun, and Jessica had no idea she was already playing from behind. Belle's hand trembled slightly as she swiped her access card at Nordtech's entrance the next morning. The November Helsinki air bit at her cheeks, but the cold felt clarifying rather than harsh. She'd spent the previous evening in her small Punavori apartment, mapping out what she knew and identifying what she needed to learn. The open workspace buzzed with its usual energy, developers debugging code, project managers coordinating timelines, the comfortable rhythm of a successful tech company. Belle moved through it like she always had, quietly competent and largely invisible. But today, that invisibility felt like an asset rather than a limitation. She settled into her cramped office and opened her laptop with practiced efficiency. Her legitimate work provided perfect cover. Data analysis required deep dives into system logs, financial patterns, project histories. No one would question Belle Mitchell spending long hours examining corporate data. It was simply what she did. The expense reports came first. Jessica's corporate card showed a pattern that made Belle's analytical mind hum with recognition. High-end restaurants that exceeded per-meal allowances. Hotel charges in cities where no Nordtech business was scheduled. Shopping purchases categorized as, quote, client entertainment that seemed suspiciously personal. Most telling were the timing patterns. Expenses that coincided with Jessica's weekend disappearances. The mysterious client meetings that never appeared on shared calendars. Belle cross-referenced these against project budgets and found the discrepancies she'd expected. Money allocated for technical development was being redirected through expense accounts that Jessica controlled directly. The amounts weren't massive. Jessica was too smart for obvious embezzlement, but they were consistent and clever. More interesting were the intellectual property patterns. Belle pulled up patent filings, client presentations, board reports from the past 18 months. Jessica's name appeared as primary contributor on innovations that Belle remembered developing during her late-night coding sessions. The smart traffic optimization algorithm that had won the Helsinki municipal contract. Belle's code, Jessica's presentation. The predictive maintenance system that impressed the manufacturing clients. Belle's machine learning model, Jessica's strategic vision. Working late again? Tom Richardson's voice interrupted Belle's concentration. Her closest colleague at Nordtech leaned against her doorframe, coffee cup in hand, his kind face showing the mild concern of a friend who'd noticed changes. Belle looked up, realizing she'd been so absorbed in her research that she'd missed lunch entirely. Just trying to understand some patterns in our project data. Tom's expression shifted slightly. He had an engineer's mind for detail and a moral compass that made him uncomfortable with ambiguity. Everything okay? You seemed distant yesterday after that client call. This was the moment Belle had been preparing for. Tom was trustworthy, but he was also cautious. A family man who couldn't afford to take risks with his career. She needed to be careful about how much she revealed. I'm seeing some inconsistencies in how our technical contributions are being documented, Belle said carefully. Nothing dramatic, just patterns that don't quite match my recollection of how projects developed. Tom stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. What kind of patterns? Belle turned her screen slightly so Tom could see the project attribution reports she'd compiled. His engineer's eye immediately caught the discrepancies. His own contributions to the traffic algorithm minimized. Belle's work credited as collaborative development rather than primary innovation. This isn't right, Tom said quietly, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd lived through these projects. You wrote that core optimization function. I remember you explaining it to me. Belle nodded, watching Tom process the implications. She could see him beginning to understand that this wasn't just about documentation errors. Tom, Belle said carefully, how much do you know about Jessica's background before Nordtech? Tom's question about Jessica's background hung in the air for 3 days before Belle found her answer. Lisa Brooks had been surprisingly easy to locate through LinkedIn, former Nordtech financial analyst, now working remotely for a Seattle-based startup. Her departure 18 months ago had been sudden, officially attributed to, quote, pursuing new opportunities. But Belle's investigation had revealed something more troubling. Belle crafted her approach carefully. A video call request positioned as career networking. One MIT graduate reaching out to another for advice about navigating corporate finance roles. Lisa's response came within hours. Warm, professional, eager to help a fellow alum. It's always nice to connect with other MIT people in tech, Lisa said as their video call connected. She looked tired, Belle noticed. Dark circles under intelligent eyes. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight that wasn't entirely professional. Belle had prepared for this conversation like a data analysis project. Multiple approaches, careful questions, patient observation of responses. I'm trying to understand the financial systems at Nordtech better. I know you worked closely with executive expense management. Something shifted in Lisa's expression. Not quite alarm, but a wariness that confirmed Belle's suspicions. Nordtech has pretty standard corporate finance structures, Lisa said carefully. Nothing unusual about their systems. Belle recognized the deflection, the same careful neutrality she'd perfected herself when navigating uncomfortable corporate territory. I'm particularly interested in how expense oversight works at the executive level. Jessica mentioned you'd helped streamline some of those processes. The mention of Jessica's name created a visible reaction. Lisa's shoulders tensed, her professional smile faltering slightly. Jessica and I worked together on various financial projects, Lisa said, but her voice carried an undertone that Belle's analytical mind cataloged as significant. Belle leaned forward slightly, her tone becoming more personal. Lisa, I'm going to be direct. I've been noticing some patterns in financial data that don't quite add up. Expense reports that seem creative. Project budgets that shift in ways that don't match the technical work being done. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving away from the camera. When she looked back, the professional mask had slipped entirely. What exactly are you asking me? I'm asking if you left Nordtech because you discovered something that made staying impossible. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the slight delay of the video connection. Belle watched Lisa's internal struggle play out across her features, the conflict between self-preservation and the burden of knowledge. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica was systematically manipulating expense reports, moving money between projects to cover personal purchases. I documented everything because that's what I do. I'm thorough. But when I tried to raise concerns through proper channels, what happened? Nothing. That was the problem. The concerns disappeared into executive review processes that Jessica controlled, and suddenly my position became, quote, redundant. Belle felt the pieces clicking into place with the satisfying precision of a solved algorithm. Lisa, do you still have those documents? Lisa's laugh was bitter. 3 backup copies. I told myself it was just good record keeping, but honestly, I think I knew someone would eventually ask the right questions. Would you be willing to share them? The question hung between them, carrying implications that both women understood perfectly. Lisa was quiet for another long moment, then nodded slowly. It's time, she said simply. I should have done this 18 months ago. Rachel Cooper's office was barely larger than Belle's, but it buzzed with the energy of someone who still believed in the transformative power of technology. Whiteboards covered every available wall space, filled with algorithmic equations and flowcharts that spoke to Belle's MIT-trained mind like a familiar language. I heard you went to MIT too, Belle said, settling into the single visitor chair that Rachel had squeezed between her desk and a tower of machine learning textbooks. Computer science? Rachel's face lit up with the enthusiasm Belle remembered from her own graduate school days. Artificial intelligence, class of 2023. I specialized in predictive algorithms for complex systems. Actually, that's what brought me to Nordtech, the opportunity to work with Jessica Mitchell. She has such a reputation for supporting innovative AI development. Belle's analytical mind noted the past tense. The slight emphasis that suggested Rachel's enthusiasm had been tempered by experience. How has that been? Working directly with Jessica? Something flickered across Rachel's expression. Too quick for most people to catch, but Belle had spent years reading the subtle signs of corporate disappointment. It's been educational, Rachel said carefully. Jessica's very hands-on with the innovative projects. She really understands the strategic implications of technical work. Belle recognized the corporate speak, the way Rachel was describing executive oversight in terms that could be interpreted positively while containing hints of something more complicated. It was the same careful language Belle had perfected when describing her own relationship with Jessica. I've been reviewing some of our recent client presentations, Belle said, pulling up her tablet. The predictive maintenance algorithm for the manufacturing clients. That was brilliant work. The way it integrated real-time sensor data with historical failure patterns. Rachel's eyes brightened, then dimmed slightly. Thank you. That project was challenging. Jessica had very specific ideas about how the algorithm should be presented to clients. I imagine she's good at translating technical work into business language. Belle paused, watching Rachel's reaction. How did you feel about the final presentation? Did it accurately represent your technical approach? The question was carefully neutral, but Rachel's response was immediate and telling. Her shoulders sagged slightly, the enthusiasm draining from her posture. Belle, can I ask you something? When you develop an algorithm, really build it from scratch, debug it, optimize it, do you feel like it's yours? Like it represents your thinking, your approach to solving problems? Belle understood immediately. Always. Every piece of code I write carries my logical fingerprint. Then you'll understand why it was difficult to watch Jessica present my predictive maintenance algorithm as her, quote, collaborative vision for the client. Rachel's voice carried a hurt that was still fresh. I wrote every line of that code. I solved the integration problems. I optimized the performance metrics. But somehow, in the board presentation, it became Jessica's strategic innovation with my, quote, technical support. Belle felt her own experiences reflected in Rachel's words. The casual appropriation of intellectual work, the way technical innovation was reframed as executive strategy. Rachel, Belle said quietly, do you have documentation of your original work? Development logs? Early code versions? Design documents? Rachel's expression sharpened. Why do you ask? Because I think it's time Jessica learned the difference between strategic vision and algorithmic innovation. Dr. Sarah Anderson's corner office occupied the top floor of Nordtech's Helsinki headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering an unobstructed view of the harbor. Belle had requested this meeting through official channels, framing it as a presentation of quarterly performance metrics and strategic recommendations. The board chair had agreed with the efficiency Belle had come to expect from Silicon Valley executives. Ms. Mitchell, Sarah said, gesturing toward the conference table that dominated one side of her office. I understand you have some insights about our current operational performance. Belle had prepared for this moment with the same methodical precision she applied to data analysis. Her tablet contained carefully curated information, not accusations, but questions raised by patterns in the data. She knew Sarah Anderson's reputation, a former tech CEO who had built her own company from startup to acquisition, someone who valued competence above politics. Dr. Anderson, I've been analyzing our project performance metrics over the past 18 months, Belle began, her voice steady despite the stakes. There are some trends that I think warrant board attention. She opened her first presentation slide, a graph showing the correlation between technical innovation and client satisfaction. The data was compelling because it was accurate. Projects that featured genuine algorithmic breakthroughs consistently outperformed those that relied primarily on existing solutions. Interesting, Sarah said, leaning forward to study the metrics. What's driving this performance differential? That's where the analysis becomes more complex, Belle replied, advancing to her next slide. When I map these performance outcomes against project attribution records, some patterns emerge that don't align with the technical development process. Sarah's expression sharpened. 30 years in tech had taught her to recognize when data was telling a story that official reports had missed. Belle displayed a timeline showing the development of the predictive maintenance algorithm alongside Jessica's board presentations. The technical milestones were documented in development logs, but the corporate communications presented a different narrative about the innovation process. This is Rachel Cooper's work, Sarah said immediately, recognizing the algorithmic approach. I remember her from the hiring process, brilliant MIT graduate. But Jessica presented this as collaborative executive development. That's the pattern I'm seeing across multiple projects, Belle said, her confidence growing as Sarah engaged with the evidence. Technical innovations being reframed as strategic vision, with the actual developers credited as implementation support. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her experienced eyes moving between the data presentations. Ms. Mitchell, these are serious implications you're raising. Do you have additional supporting evidence? Belle had anticipated this question. I have documentation of financial irregularities that correlate with these attribution discrepancies. former employees who can verify the actual development process, and system logs that demonstrate the timeline of technical innovation versus executive presentation. Former employees? Sarah's voice carried the sharp interest of someone who understood that departing talent often carried the most honest assessment of corporate culture. Lisa Brooks, specifically. She left abruptly after discovering financial inconsistencies in Jessica's expense management. Sarah's expression shifted, and Belle realized she'd struck something significant. Lisa Brooks approached the board 18 months ago with concerns about executive expense oversight. Her complaints were redirected through proper channels. Proper channels that Jessica controlled, Belle said carefully. Exactly. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind clearly working through implications. Miss Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. The board has had concerns about Jessica's leadership for some time, but we've lacked concrete evidence of misconduct. What you're presenting suggests a systematic pattern of both intellectual property appropriation and financial irregularities. Belle felt the shift in the conversation, from employee presenting concerns to potential ally discussing strategy. Dr. Anderson, what would constitute sufficient evidence for board action? Sarah's smile was sharp, carrying the edge that had made her successful in the competitive world of tech entrepreneurship. Comprehensive documentation, witness testimony from credible sources, and external validation from someone with investigative expertise. External validation? Corporate investigations require professional oversight to ensure legal compliance and procedural integrity. I can recommend someone. Michael Davis, former FBI white-collar crime investigator. If your evidence meets his standards, the board will take immediate action. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Belle nodded, understanding that she'd crossed a threshold. This was no longer her personal campaign against Jessica's dismissive treatment. This was corporate governance, with all the procedural requirements and legal implications that entailed. Dr. Anderson, Belle said carefully, what are the risks for someone in my position pursuing this kind of investigation? Sarah's expression became protective, almost maternal. Significant. But Ms. Mitchell, what you've uncovered suggests that the greater risk is allowing this pattern to continue. Jessica's behavior isn't just damaging individual careers. It's corrupting the entire innovation process that makes Nordtech valuable. Belle left the meeting with Michael Davis's contact information and Sarah Anderson's cautious support. The game had evolved beyond personal justice into institutional accountability. Tom Richardson stood in Belle's office doorway at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday, his usually patient expression carrying an edge of concern that Belle had never seen before. The open workspace beyond was nearly empty, just the cleaning crew moving efficiently between workstations and the distant hum of servers maintaining Nordtech's digital infrastructure. Belle, we need to talk. She looked up from her laptop, where she'd been organizing the evidence files that Michael Davis would review tomorrow. 3 weeks had passed since her meeting with Sarah Anderson, and Belle's investigation had consumed her evenings and weekends with the intensity of a technical project approaching deadline. Of course. Come in, close the door. Tom settled into the chair across from her desk, but his posture remained tense. You've been different. Working late every night, distracted during meetings, asking strange questions about corporate policies and former employees. Sarah mentioned you'd met with her about, quote, performance metrics. He paused, studying Belle's face. What's really going on? Belle had anticipated this conversation. Tom was her closest friend at Nordtech, someone whose ethical compass she trusted completely. But he was also cautious by nature, a family man whose wife Emma was 6 months pregnant with their second child. His decisions carried weight beyond just his own career. Tom, what I'm about to tell you could put you in a difficult position, Belle said carefully. Are you sure you want to know? I'm sure I want to know why my best friend has turned into someone I barely recognize. Belle closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. For the next 20 minutes, she methodically explained everything. Jessica's dismissive comment in Finnish, the financial irregularities, Lisa Brooks's evidence, Rachel Cooper's stolen algorithm, Sarah Anderson's support, and the upcoming investigation by Michael Davis. Tom listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to concern to something approaching alarm. When Bell finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind processing the implications. Jesus, Bell, do you understand what you're risking here? I understand that Jessica has been systematically stealing credit for technical innovations while embezzling company funds. I understand that she's created a corporate culture where talented people like Lisa and Rachel are disposable whenever they become inconvenient. And I understand that you're putting your entire career at risk based on what amounts to a personal vendetta. The words hit Bell like a slap. Personal vendetta? Tom leaned forward, his voice carrying the intensity of someone trying to save a friend from disaster. Bell, Jessica calling you expendable was cruel and unprofessional. But what you're describing, this comprehensive investigation, building legal cases, coordinating with board members, this goes way beyond seeking justice for workplace discrimination. Bell felt her analytical mind engage, examining Tom's concerns with the same precision she applied to debugging code. You think I'm motivated by revenge rather than principle. I think you're brilliant and methodical, and completely capable of destroying Jessica Mitchell's career. I also think you're so focused on proving she's wrong about you that you've lost perspective on the ethical implications of your methods. The ethical implications? Bell's voice carried an edge she rarely allowed herself in professional settings. Tom, she's a criminal. She's stealing money and intellectual property. She's creating a toxic environment that drives away talented people. What's ethically questionable about exposing that? How you've gone about exposing it, Tom replied, his voice steady but firm. Accessing expense reports that weren't meant for your review. Contacting former employees to gather evidence. Building relationships with board members based on incomplete information. Bell, you're conducting corporate espionage. The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Bell recognized the moral complexity Tom was highlighting, but she also felt the weight of Jessica's casual dismissal, the systematic appropriation of her work, the knowledge that others had suffered similar treatment. Tom, you've seen how Jessica operates. You know the traffic optimization algorithm was my work, not her collaborative vision. You've watched her take credit for innovations she didn't develop. Are you saying I should have just accepted being called expendable and waited for her to find a convenient way to eliminate my position? Tom's expression softened slightly, the conflict between loyalty and principle playing out across his features. I'm saying there were other options. HR complaints, formal grievance procedures, external employment lawyers. Legal channels that wouldn't have required you to become someone you're not. Legal channels that Jessica controls or influences. Tom, Lisa Brooks tried the proper procedures. Where did that get her? Tom was quiet for another long moment, his internal struggle visible. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the reluctant recognition of someone who understood the impossible position Bell had been placed in. Bell, I've watched Jessica's behavior for 3 years. I've seen the way she dismisses non-American employees, takes credit for technical work, creates an environment where people like you and Rachel feel invisible. You're not wrong about what she's doing, but I'm worried about what this campaign is doing to you. And I'm worried about what happens to people like me, people with families, people who can't afford to take these kinds of risks when the corporate warfare begins. Michael Davis's office occupied the 23rd floor of a sleek Helsinki business tower, its minimalist design reflecting the precision of someone who had spent 20 years investigating corporate fraud for the FBI. Bell sat across from his glass desk, her comprehensive evidence files organized in the methodical presentation that Tom's concerns had taught her was necessary for maintaining ethical credibility. Ms. Mitchell, Michael said, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the financial documentation Lisa Brooks had provided. This level of detail is impressive. Most corporate whistleblowers come to me with suspicions and fragments. You've presented a systematic analysis that would satisfy federal prosecution standards. Bell felt a surge of validation, but also the weight of Michael's professional assessment. Dr. Anderson indicated you could help me understand the legal implications of what I've uncovered. Indeed. Michael set down Lisa's expense report analysis and picked up Rachel Cooper's intellectual property documentation. What you've documented here constitutes multiple categories of corporate misconduct. Financial fraud, intellectual property theft, violations of fiduciary duty to shareholders. The question isn't whether crimes have been committed, it's whether you've gathered admissible evidence through legally acceptable methods. The distinction sent a chill through Belle's analytical mind. What do you mean by legally acceptable methods? Michael's expression became pedagogical, carrying the authority of someone who had trained corporate investigators for 2 decades. Accessing company systems for legitimate business purposes, that's acceptable. Contacting former employees who voluntarily share information, also acceptable. But if you've accessed financial records outside your normal job responsibilities, or if you've gathered information through deception, that could compromise the entire investigation. Belle's methodical preparation suddenly felt precarious. I used my standard system access to review project attribution records and expense patterns. I contacted Lisa Brooks and Rachel Cooper through professional networking. Everything I've gathered came from people who chose to share information voluntarily. Good, Michael said, making notes on a legal pad. That maintains the integrity of your evidence chain. But, Ms. Mitchell, I need you to understand something crucial. What you've uncovered requires formal corporate investigation procedures. This can't remain an informal employee concern. It needs external oversight and legal documentation. What does that mean practically? Michael leaned back in his chair, his FBI training evident in how he organized complex information into clear procedural steps. It means I'll conduct a preliminary investigation to validate your findings. If the evidence meets legal standards, and based on what you've shown me, I'll present a formal report to the board of directors recommending immediate suspension of Jessica Mitchell and comprehensive audit of her financial and operational decisions. Belle felt the investigation shifting beyond her control, evolving from personal justice into institutional accountability. What happens to the people who provided evidence? Lisa, Rachel, Tom Richardson. They'll be protected under corporate whistleblower policies and Finnish employment law. But, Ms. Mitchell, you need to understand that Jessica will likely retaliate when she realizes she's under investigation. Are you prepared for that? The question forced Belle to confront something she'd been avoiding throughout her methodical evidence gathering. What kind of retaliation? Anything from performance reviews designed to justify termination, to accusations that you've violated corporate policies, to attempts to frame you for the very misconduct she's committed. Cornered executives become dangerous, and Jessica Mitchell has the authority and desperation to make your professional life very difficult. Belle's mind processed the implications with analytical precision. How long does a formal investigation typically take? 3 to 6 weeks for comprehensive documentation, but the board can take immediate protective action once they receive my preliminary findings. Sarah Anderson indicated they've been looking for justification to address Jessica's leadership for some time. Michael stood and moved to his office window, the Helsinki skyline darkening into early winter evening. Ms. Mitchell, I've investigated dozens of corporate fraud cases. What you've uncovered represents one of the most systematic patterns of executive misconduct I've encountered in the tech sector. Jessica Mitchell hasn't just stolen money and credit, she's corrupted the entire innovation process that makes Nordtech valuable. So the board will act? The board will have no choice but to act. But between now and then, you need to be extremely careful. Document everything. Avoid any actions that could be interpreted as insubordination. And prepare yourself for Jessica to discover what's happening and respond accordingly. Belle left Michael's office with a formal investigation timeline and the sobering recognition that her quest for justice was about to become a high-stakes corporate battle. The evidence was compelling, the legal framework was sound, but the personal cost was about to escalate dramatically. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Heard Jessica's been asking questions about who's been accessing financial system logs. Be careful. The game had reached its most dangerous phase. Jessica was becoming aware that someone was investigating her, and Belle was about to discover just how ruthless a cornered executive could become. Belle's phone vibrated at 6:23 a.m. with a message that made her stomach drop. Emergency meeting with Jessica at 8 a.m. Bring all current project files. HR. She stared at the text while Finnish morning news played in the background of her Punavori apartment, the familiar cadence of her grandmother's language now carrying an edge of anxiety. 3 days had passed since Michael Davis began his formal investigation, and Jessica's behavior had grown increasingly erratic. System access logs showed unusual activity in financial databases. Former employees reported receiving calls asking about their departure circumstances. Belle arrived at Nordtech 30 minutes early, using her keycard to access the building's quiet morning atmosphere. The cleaning crew was finishing their rounds, and the security guard offered his usual polite nod. Everything appeared normal, but Belle's analytical mind registered subtle changes. Jessica's assistant had been asking questions about Belle's recent meeting schedules, and IT had mentioned routine security audits of employee system access. Jessica's corner office felt different when Belle entered at precisely 8 a.m. The usual corporate warmth had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. Jessica sat behind her desk reviewing what appeared to be personnel files, her posture carrying the controlled tension of someone under pressure. "Belle, thank you for coming in early," Jessica said, her voice maintaining its executive authority but with an undertone that Belle recognized as dangerous. "I've been reviewing some concerning patterns in our system usage and wanted to discuss them with you directly." Belle settled into the chair across from Jessica's desk, her prepared project files untouched in her lap. "Of course. How can I help?" Jessica turned her computer screen toward Belle, displaying a detailed log of database access records. Belle's username appeared frequently, highlighted in red across multiple financial and administrative systems. "Can you explain why you've been accessing expense reports and personnel files outside your normal analytical responsibilities?" The question was direct and accusatory, designed to put Belle on the defensive. But 3 weeks of methodical investigation had prepared her for this moment. "I've been conducting comprehensive performance analysis for the quarterly review. Dr. Anderson requested detailed metrics on project attribution and resource allocation." It was true. Sarah Anderson had indeed requested such analysis, though not in the context Jessica assumed. Belle watched Jessica's expression carefully, noting the micro-expressions that suggested both suspicion and uncertainty. "Interesting," Jessica said, her tone becoming more aggressive, "because I've also discovered that you've been contacting former employees, asking questions about their departure circumstances and their experiences with company financial procedures." Belle felt the walls closing in but maintained her analytical composure. "Professional networking is encouraged by our corporate policies. I've been seeking career advice from MIT alumni who've worked in similar corporate environments." "Career advice?" Jessica's smile carried no warmth. "Belle, I'm going to be direct with you. I believe you've been conducting an unauthorized investigation into company operations, accessing confidential information, and gathering evidence for purposes that have nothing to do with your job responsibilities." The accusation hung in the air between them, and Belle recognized this as the critical moment. Jessica was fishing, trying to determine how much Belle knew and whether she posed a genuine threat. Her response would determine how the next phase of this conflict developed. "Jessica, I'm not sure what you're implying, but my work has always focused on data analysis and performance optimization. If there are concerns about my system access or professional networking, I'm happy to discuss them with HR or provide documentation of my analytical projects." Jessica leaned forward, her executive mask slipping to reveal something more predatory. "Here's what I think happened, Belle. You've been gathering information to undermine my leadership because you feel undervalued. You've convinced yourself that you're some kind of corporate detective, building a case against me based on selective interpretation of routine business activities." Belle felt her grandmother's voice in her mind. "Patience, Kultaseni. Let them reveal themselves completely before you act." "I think," Jessica continued, her voice becoming more threatening, "that you've forgotten your place in this organization. You're a data analyst, not a strategic decision maker. You work with numbers and algorithms, not corporate policy and leadership vision." The dismissive tone was identical to what Belle had heard during the Finnish conference call, and she realized Jessica was making the same fundamental error, underestimating the person sitting across from her. "You're right," Belle said calmly. "I do work with numbers and algorithms. I analyze patterns and draw conclusions based on data. And sometimes, Jessica, the data tells stories that people don't want to hear. Jessica's expression shifted, recognizing that Belle's response carried implications she hadn't expected. What exactly are you suggesting? Belle stood to leave, her project files still untouched. I'm suggesting that numbers don't lie, patterns don't hide, and eventually, data analysis reveals the truth about any system, including corporate management systems. She walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Jessica? I do speak Finnish. Fluently, just in case that becomes relevant to any future conversations. The Nordtech boardroom felt charged with tension at 2 p.m. sharp on a gray December afternoon. Belle sat at the polished conference table, her comprehensive evidence presentation loaded on her laptop, while the 7 board members filed in with expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Dr. Sarah Anderson took her position at the head of the table, her Silicon Valley authority commanding immediate attention. Jessica entered last, her executive confidence intact, but her eyes carrying the wariness of someone who had spent the past week trying to understand why this meeting had been called, with minimal advance notice. She settled across from Belle, her posture maintaining corporate poise while her gaze promised retaliation. This emergency session has been called to address serious allegations regarding executive conduct, Sarah announced, her voice carrying formal gravity. Ms. Mitchell has presented evidence of misconduct that requires board evaluation. Michael Davis will present his investigative findings. Michael stepped forward with the methodical presence that had made him effective during 20 years of FBI white-collar crime investigation. His presentation began with financial evidence, expense reports, budget transfers, and corporate card statements that painted a clear picture of systematic embezzlement. Over 18 months, approximately €180,000 were diverted from project budgets through manipulated expense accounts, Michael stated, his findings displayed in charts that made Jessica's financial misconduct undeniable. Jessica's response was immediate and aggressive. These are routine business expenses, taken out of context by someone with obvious personal motivations against my leadership. But Michael was prepared for executive pushback. Ms. Mitchell, these restaurant charges coincide with your personal social media posts. These hotel expenses occur in cities where Nordtech has no business activities. The pattern is systematic and deliberate. Belle watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to concern as the financial evidence accumulated. But the intellectual property theft proved even more damaging. Rachel Cooper joined the meeting remotely, her voice steady as she presented the original development logs for her predictive maintenance algorithm. Every line of code, every optimization decision, every integration solution. I developed these independently, Rachel stated, her documentation displayed alongside Jessica's board presentations claiming strategic vision for the same innovations. Rachel was part of my development team, Jessica countered, her voice becoming more desperate. Collaborative work naturally involves executive guidance and strategic direction. Tom Richardson's testimony provided the final blow. His detailed recollection of development timelines, combined with system logs showing when innovations were actually created versus when Jessica presented them as her strategic initiatives, demolished any remaining credibility. I watched Belle Mitchell develop the traffic optimization algorithm during late-night coding sessions, Tom said, his engineer's precision making his testimony unassailable. Jessica's first involvement was presenting it to clients as her collaborative vision. The vote was unanimous. Jessica Mitchell was immediately suspended pending criminal investigation, her corporate access revoked, and a comprehensive audit of all projects and financial activities initiated. Jessica's final words as security escorted her from the building carried the venom of someone whose carefully constructed corporate persona had been systematically dismantled. You have no idea what you've done, Belle. This company will never trust you again. But Belle felt only the quiet satisfaction of patterns correctly analyzed, data properly interpreted, and justice methodically achieved. The numbers had told their story, and for once, the truth had prevailed over charismatic authority. 2 weeks after Jessica's removal, Belle stood in what had been Jessica's corner office, now temporarily serving as the executive transition space, while the board determined Nordtech's future leadership structure. The Helsinki winter had deepened, snow accumulating against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but the atmosphere inside the company felt lighter than it had in years. "The board has made their decision," Dr. Sarah Anderson said, settling into the chair across from Belle's temporary desk. "They're offering you the CEO position." Belle's fingers paused over her laptop keyboard, where she'd been reviewing the comprehensive audit results that Michael Davis had completed. The financial damage was significant, nearly €200,000 diverted through Jessica's expense manipulation, but the intellectual property recovery was proving even more valuable. 3 major innovations previously credited to Jessica's strategic vision were now properly attributed to their actual developers, opening new patent opportunities and client relationships. "Sarah, I appreciate the board's confidence, but I need to think carefully about whether accepting that role would represent justice or just another form of corruption." Sarah's expression carried the approval of someone who had spent decades evaluating leadership potential. "That response is exactly why you're the right person for the position." Jessica would have accepted immediately, seeing it as validation of her superiority. "You're questioning whether power serves principle or compromises it." Belle moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered Helsinki harbor where her grandmother had once told her stories about surviving impossible circumstances through patience and strategic thinking. "Mummo used to say that the most dangerous moment comes after you've won, when you have to decide what kind of person victory makes you." Wise woman. What would she advise about this decision? She'd ask whether I was accepting power to serve others, or to prove something to myself. Belle turned back to Sarah, her analytical mind working through the implications. "If I take this position, how do I ensure I don't become what I fought against?" Sarah's smile carried genuine warmth. "By surrounding yourself with people who will challenge your decisions and hold you accountable. People like Tom Richardson, who questioned your methods even when he supported your goals. People like Rachel Cooper, who understands both innovation and integrity." Through the office windows, Belle could see Tom walking across the courtyard toward the building entrance, carrying the coffee and morning pastries that had become their ritual during the transition period. Rachel Cooper was scheduled to join them remotely for the team meeting, where they would discuss the new innovation attribution protocols Belle had drafted. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Lisa Brooks wants to return to Nordtech. She's requested a position in financial oversight, specifically focused on preventing the kind of expense manipulation that Jessica used. She wants to build systems that make future fraud impossible." Belle felt the pieces of institutional change aligning with satisfying precision. "And Rachel? Wants to lead the AI development team, with full credit and patent attribution for her innovations. She's also requested mentorship responsibilities for new graduates. Apparently your approach to recognizing talent has inspired her thinking about leadership development." The conference room door opened, and Tom entered carrying their usual morning coffee order, his expression carrying the cautious optimism that had characterized his approach throughout the investigation. "Morning, CEO-elect," he said, the title carrying both respect and gentle mockery. "I haven't accepted yet," Belle replied, accepting her coffee with the gratitude of someone who understood that friendship had been the foundation for everything that followed. "But you will," Tom said with certainty. "Because you've realized that the choice isn't between power and principle, it's between abandoning the institution to people like Jessica or taking responsibility for building something better." Belle's phone buzzed with a video call notification. Rachel Cooper's face appeared on the screen, her enthusiasm undimmed by the corporate warfare she'd witnessed. "Belle, I've been thinking about the innovation lab we discussed. What if we created a system where junior developers present their work directly to clients, with full attribution and patent sharing? What if we made technical recognition as important as executive relationship management?" Belle looked around the room. At Sarah's experienced guidance, Tom's moral compass, Rachel's innovative energy, and the knowledge that Lisa would soon return to help build better financial safeguards. This wasn't about accepting power. It was about accepting responsibility for institutional transformation. "Rachel, schedule a board presentation for next week. It's time to demonstrate what ethical leadership in tech can actually accomplish." Belle Mitchell had been called expendable. Instead, she had become essential, not through corporate politics or charismatic authority, but through the patient application of analytical precision to the problem of justice. Her grandmother would have been proud. The snow continued falling outside, but inside Nordtech Solutions, a new kind of corporate culture was beginning to take root. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.